I was 15 years old when the world I knew ended in a cold, sterile bathroom stall during third period chemistry, and the most terrifying part wasn't the blood or the blinding pain, but the fact that I had to keep my hand clamped over my own mouth so no one would hear me screaming. I was just a sophomore, a girl who was supposed to be worried about homecoming and geometry tests, but instead, I was staring down at a life I wasn't prepared for while the muffled sounds of high school life continued just outside the door. I need you to listen to this and tell me honestly, would you have been able to survive that hour? Or would you have broken under the weight of a secret so heavy it was literally tearing you apart? Was I a monster for trying to hide it? Or was I just a kid who had been failed by everyone who was supposed to protect her? Tell me, what would you have done if you were me? To understand how I ended up on that bathroom floor, you have to understand the house I grew up in because my life didn't start being a nightmare that morning. It had been one for a long time. My parents were the kind of people who cared more about the neighbors' opinions than their own daughter's heartbeat. My father was a deacon at our local church, a man of rigid rules and iron discipline. And my mother was his silent shadow, a woman who had mastered the art of looking the other way so she wouldn't have to deal with the truth. In our house, sin was the ultimate dirty word, and reputation was our only currency. I wasn't allowed to date, I wasn't allowed to go to parties, and I was expected to be the perfect, straight-A student who would eventually go to a Christian college and marry someone my father approved of. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and the pressure to be the shining example of a godly family was a suffocating weight on my chest every single day. If a hair was out of place or if I spoke too loudly in public, I would receive a lecture that lasted for hours about how I was representing the family name. My bedroom wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cell where I spent my time studying the Bible and textbooks, terrified of making a single mistake that would trigger my father's disappointment. But life doesn't always follow a script. The summer before my sophomore year, I met a boy named Caleb. He was older, 19, and he worked at the garage where my dad took our car. He was the first person who ever looked at me like I was a human being instead of a project or a reflection of my parents' ego. He was kind, or so I thought, and he gave me the attention I was starving for. He would leave notes under the windshield wiper of my bike, and we would meet in the woods behind the community center where the shadows were thick enough to hide us. For a girl who had lived under a microscope, the darkness of those woods felt like freedom. I was naive, desperate for love, and completely ignorant about how the world worked. I thought we were in a movie. I didn't realize I was just a temporary distraction for him. I remember the humid summer nights, the smell of pine needles, and the way he told me I was beautiful. Words I had never heard within the walls of my own home. When the relationship happened, it was fast and messy, and when I told him a few months later that I had missed my period, he didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. He looked at me with a cold, detached fear that made my blood run cold. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even apologize. He moved 2 states away within the week and changed his number, leaving me with nothing but a positive test kit hidden in the bottom of my trash can, buried under layers of school papers. I was 15, terrified, and completely alone. I spent months hiding it. I was naturally thin, so I wore baggy hoodies even when the weather turned warm, claiming I was always cold. I became an expert in the mirror, practicing how to walk without waddling, how to suck in my stomach until it hurt, and how to keep a neutral expression when the morning sickness made me want to collapse in the hallway. I would wake up at 5 a.m. just to vomit in silence, running the shower so the sound wouldn't wake my parents. I skipped meals when my parents were watching and ate in secret late at night, stale crackers and peanut butter, to keep the nausea at bay. I became an expert at avoiding touch, flinching if my mom tried to hug me, making up excuses about being stressed with schoolwork or having female issues that I knew would make my father uncomfortable enough to stop asking questions. I lived in a constant state of panic, waiting for the moment someone would notice, but no one ever did. My teachers saw a girl who was getting quieter, but they assumed it was just teenage moodiness. My parents saw a daughter who was becoming more withdrawn, but they were too busy with their church bake sales and committee meetings to ask why. I remember sitting at the dinner table, feeling the baby kick against my ribs while my father complained about the moral decay of the local youth, and I had to bite my tongue so hard it bled to keep from screaming the truth at him. I started wearing 2 pairs of Spanx under my jeans just to keep the bump from showing, even though it made it hard to breathe. The physical pain of hiding the pregnancy was nothing compared to the mental torture of knowing that every day brought me closer to a cliff I couldn't avoid jumping off. By the time I reached my 3rd trimester, I was operating on pure adrenaline and dissociation. I felt like I was watching someone else's life through a foggy window. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a doctor. I didn't even have a name for what was happening inside me, because if I acknowledged it, it became real. And if it became real, I knew my life was over. I spent hours on the internet at the school library, searching for things in incognito mode that no 15-year-old should ever have to know. I looked up how to cut a cord, how to keep a newborn quiet, and how to hide the evidence of a birth. I was prepared for a crime, not a miracle. My nights were spent crying into my pillow, wondering if I would die in my bedroom, and if my parents would even care, or if they would just be embarrassed by the blood on the carpet. I had no one to talk to. My friends were busy talking about the spring formal, and who was going with whom, while I was researching the signs of preeclampsia, and trying to figure out how to dispose of a placenta. The isolation was a physical weight, a coldness that lived in my bones and never went away. Then came that Tuesday. It started with a dull ache in my lower back during breakfast, but I ignored it, shoving a piece of toast down my throat to prove I was fine. By 2nd period, the ache had turned into sharp, rhythmic stabs that made me break out in a cold sweat. I sat in my history class, gripping the edges of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white, counting the seconds between the waves of pain. My teacher asked if I was okay, and I just nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. I told myself it was just cramps, just stress, just anything other than what it actually was. But then, as I was walking to chemistry, I felt a warm gush that I couldn't ignore. My water had broken in the middle of the crowded hallway during passing period. I froze, terrified that someone would see the puddle. But the floor was dark tile, and everyone was rushing. I didn't stop, I didn't cry out. I just clutched my books to my chest and bolted for the nearest bathroom in the science wing. I locked myself in the far stall, the one with the broken latch that people usually avoided, and I collapsed onto the floor. The pain was unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just physical. It felt like my entire identity was being ripped open. I could hear girls coming in and out, laughing about their weekend plans, complaining about the cafeteria food, and reapplying their lip gloss just inches away from where I was fighting for my life. Every time a door opened, I held my breath, praying that the sound of the hand dryer would drown out my whimpers. I was pressing my forehead against the cold, graffiti-covered metal of the stall, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening anymore. I thought about the irony of it all. I was in a building meant for education, for the future, and yet I felt like my future was being extinguished in a dirty toilet stall. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, realizing that there was no way out of this room without my entire world changing forever. I looked at the tiles, counting the cracks, trying to transport my mind anywhere else. But the contractions kept pulling me back to the reality of the cold floor, and the smell of industrial bleach. The minutes felt like hours. I had no concept of time, only the rhythm of the pain, and the terrifying realization that there was no one coming to save me. So that is the situation I was in. I was 15, alone in a school bathroom, and I realized there was no going back. I had to make a choice. Do I open that door and scream for help, knowing that the moment I do, my parents will disown me, my school will expel me, and I will become the trashy girl everyone whispers about? Or do I try to handle this alone and hope I don't die on this tile floor? The blood was everywhere, and the exhaustion was setting in. I felt like I was slipping away. Before I tell you what happened in those next few minutes and how I finally faced the aftermath, I want you to pause right now. Go to the comments and tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have called for help? Or would you have tried to hide it until the very last second like I did? Do you think a 15-year-old is even capable of making a rational choice in that much pain? The next hour was a blur of agony and survival instinct. I used my hoodie to muffle my cries, biting down on the fabric until I tasted blood, and the wool felt like sandpaper against my teeth. I remember looking at the graffiti on the stall door. Someone had written "Chelsea is a snake," and "call this number for a good time," and thinking about how trivial that seemed now. Those girls were worried about boys and rumors, while I was worried about literal life and death. When the final push came, I thought my heart was going to stop. But then suddenly, there was a sound, a tiny thin cry that sounded like a kitten. My heart stopped. I reached down and picked up a tiny, shivering baby boy. He was so small, so fragile. And in that moment, all the fear I had felt for the last 9 months was replaced by a crushing, overwhelming sense of reality. I wasn't just a kid anymore. I was a mother. I cleaned him as best as I could with my shirt and the rough, brown paper towels from the dispenser, crying silently as I looked at his face. He had Caleb's nose but my eyes, and he was looking at me like I was his entire world. I held him to my chest, trying to keep him warm, feeling the heat of his tiny body against my cold skin. I didn't know how I was going to survive the next 10 minutes, let alone the next 18 years, but I knew I couldn't let anything happen to him. They wanted to erase the last 9 months as if they never happened. They told me they would pay for me to go to a boarding school in another state if I just signed the papers. They were trying to buy my silence and my son's future. But for the first time in my life, I found my voice. I looked at the man who had spent 15 years teaching me about mercy and grace, while showing me none, and I told him to leave. I told them both that if they didn't want the shame, they didn't get the daughter. Mrs. Gable stayed by my side the whole time, even bringing me a change of clothes and a teddy bear for the baby. She helped me contact social services and found a local organization that supported teen mothers. My father tried to sue for custody just to give the baby away, claiming I was an unfit mother because of my age, but the hospital social workers and Mrs. Gable testified on my behalf. They saw that I wasn't just a teen mom. I was a survivor. I didn't go back to that house. I went into a transitional living program for girls in my situation. The next few years were a blur of sleepless nights and textbooks. I had to finish high school while waking up every 2 hours to feed my son Liam. I lived in a room no bigger than a closet, sharing a kitchen with 4 other girls who were just as lost as I was. I remember crying over my chemistry homework while Liam slept on my lap, wondering how I was going to pay for diapers and bus fare. I had to deal with the stares and the rumors when I finally went back to finish my GED. People who had known me since kindergarten wouldn't look me in the eye. I heard the whispers in the grocery store. "That's the girl who gave birth in the bathroom. Her poor parents must be devastated." They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that my parents hadn't sent a single dollar or a single "How are you in 3 years?" They didn't know that I had worked 3 part-time jobs while going to community college just to keep a roof over our heads. But every time I looked at Liam, I knew I had made the right choice. Watching him take his first steps and say his first words, "Mama," was a victory that my father could never understand. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're bleeding on a bathroom floor. Mrs. Gable became the grandmother Liam never had. She spent her weekends helping me study and showing me how to cook healthy meals on a budget. She taught me that I wasn't a mistake and that Liam wasn't a sin. He was a person. Today Liam is 3 years old, and he is the best thing that ever happened to me. He is a constant reminder that even in the darkest, most shameful moments, there is a chance for a new beginning. My parents haven't spoken to me since that day at the hospital, and honestly, that's their loss. They chose their reputation. I chose my son. I learned that the people who judge you the hardest are usually the ones who are the most afraid of their own shadows. I'm sharing this because I want anyone else who feels trapped by a secret or a mistake to know that you are stronger than your circumstances. You don't have to be defined by a single moment of fear on a bathroom floor. You can build a life out of the wreckage, and sometimes the things that feel like the end of the world are actually just the beginning of a much better one. Looking back, I realized that the shame I was so afraid of was just a cage my parents built for me. Once I stepped out of it, I was finally free. I have my own small apartment now, decorated with Liam's finger paintings and nursing textbooks. I'm working toward a degree in nursing so I can be the person who helps other girls when they feel like their world is ending. Liam is thriving in preschool, and he'll never grow up in a house where reputation matters more than love. He'll never have to hide who he is or what he's feeling. Like this video if you think I made the right choice by standing up to my parents and keeping my son. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I wouldn't change a single thing about where I am now. Subscribe for more stories like this, where we dive into the real, raw, and sometimes shocking things people go through. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did my parents have a right to be angry? Or were they completely out of line for abandoning me when I needed them most? Do you think the school should have noticed sooner? I'll see you all in the next story.